With the excessive number of custom katana brands available these days, what, if anything, sets brands apart from each other? Do any of them actually forge their own blades? And are any of them actually worth the price? Hello, this is Kyle, also known as AlienTube, and today I'm reviewing my wife's custom Wakizashi from HanBon Forge. This is the 5th review in my custom Japanese sword series. So, who is HanBon Forge? Well, they're one of the many sword companies based out of Longchuan, China, and there's some speculation that they're one of the actual forges that produces the blades for many of the custom katana brands. I don't really have any way to verify that, so I take it with a pretty big grain of salt. In any case, HanBon offers a large selection of Japanese-style swords and a smaller selection of Chinese-style. Their custom Japanese swords are a bit on the lower end of the price range for a custom katana, especially when compared to swords of Northshire. Let's talk purchasing experience. Buying the Wakizashi was quite easy. My wife and I went to their custom page, selected items as desired, and when the drop-downs didn't have the options my wife wanted, we put a few notes in the provided fields. I also sent an email to their customer service line to confirm the price, which ended up being $302 US, shipping included. All in all, it was a very easy ordering process. It was also completed extremely quickly. 3 days after placing the order, HanBon emailed me pictures of the finished sword. That tells me that they have a large number of stock blades waiting for orders, and it was simply a matter of assembling the pieces into a completed Wakizashi. This is akin to the business model of Ryujin, as opposed to Swords of Northshire and Jaku Sino Sword, who seem to source the blade after the order is placed. This is further confirmed by the fact that, unlike Swords of Northshire and Jaku, HanBon and Ryujin don't have options listed for custom blade lengths. I'm confident HanBon could provide differing blade lengths if contacted, but it would almost certainly increase the production time by quite a bit. In any case, we received the Wakizashi approximately 3 weeks after ordering it, which is a great turnaround time. Unfortunately, the Wakizashi we received had some problems, most notably that the fit to the saya was so tight that after sheathing it, I was completely unable to draw it. It was utterly stuck, and no amount of force was able to change that. My repeated attempts to separate them, pulling on the saya and the Tsuka, also caused the koshirae to come loose. I contacted HanBon about the issue, and they were pretty unresponsive. The only response I got was that they suggested I file the koiguchi, which is the obvious solution, if the sword and saya weren't stuck together. I replied that I couldn't draw the sword to be able to file the koiguchi, and HanBon didn't reply. I unfortunately had to resort to a PayPal dispute to get them to respond, after which they promptly offered to send me a new sword. That replacement came very quickly as well, and it's the sword I'm reviewing today. As usual, I'm going to take a look at the different parts of the sword, starting with the saya. When we received this replacement Wakizashi, I decided we should leave the sword and saya separated for a couple of weeks to allow the wood to settle into the new climate. I didn't want this one to get stuck as well. After that wait, I discovered that the fit on this one is too tight also. This is as far into the saya as I'm willing to push the Wakizashi. Any further, and I'm pretty confident it's going to get stuck. This is going to necessitate some filing to fix, and while I plan to do it, I wanted to get this review done first. As for the features of the saya, it's got horn kurigata, koiguchi, and kojiri. The finish is an attractive wood appearance that will pair nicely with my Jaku katana as an unintentional daisho. If you look into the koiguchi, there's what looks like wood panels on the edges, and they're all shaped quite nicely, much better than most of the other saya I've received. However, you can see some globs of epoxy on both the top and bottom, where the seams are. I have a hunch that these globs might be the cause of the overly tight fit. Moving on to the Tsuka and various koshirae, let's start with the Tsuka itself. It's a pretty simple shape, which tapers slightly going from the fuchi to the koshirae. The Ito is cotton and is acceptably tight. I can move the diamonds around a bit, but they generally don't stay misshapen, and it gives a good, secure grip. I can't forcibly rotate it in my hand if I'm gripping tightly. The Ito does bunch up rather unattractively at the koshirae, and the knots are kind of sloppy. The Ito lines up very nicely at the fuchi, with no ledges at all, although it does overlap the koshirae a bit. That kind of lip is better than the koshirae being larger, however, as it shouldn't create any hot spots. I certainly didn't notice any when using it. The Samegawa is dyed black, and it's clearly panels that are glued on top of the wood core of the Tsuka, rather than inlaid. The casting quality of the koshirae is pretty decent. I haven't found any leftover spurs, and while the details aren't incredibly crisp, they're also not muddled and unrecognizable. The gold paint they use to highlight parts is nice looking, although rather sloppily applied, as you can see here. Unfortunately, both the fuchi and koshirae are slightly loose, the koshirae a little more so than the fuchi. This is pretty disappointing, as this wakizashi has only been used a couple times. I'm probably going to have to attempt to disassemble it and use a bit of paper to shim the fuchi, and maybe some super glue to secure the koshirae. In my opinion, this is not something I should have to do with a new sword, and it really detracts from the appeal of a budget sword. The tsuba, along with the other koshirae, is made of brass, and luckily it doesn't have any wiggle to it. I think the design is flashy and attractive without going over the line too garish, like many of the options available. Also made of brass are the habaki and seppa. The seppa are your bog standard ones that you'll see on just about every Longchuan katana. They're actually slightly larger than the part of the tsuba they rest on, creating a very slight overhang. The habaki has a bit of depth to the design, giving it some visual appeal not found on the more common simple shape, and the fit to the blade is about what you'd expect for this price range. It's clearly not made specifically for this blade, but I'd wager some attention was paid to selecting the habaki to ensure a decent fit. Moving on to the business end, the blade. Here's my measurements. If you haven't noticed yet, the blade has a subtle hada, which is caused by it being made of folded 1095 steel. Now this isn't remotely close to what an actual traditionally made of tamahagane katana would look like, but it does give some nice depth to the blade without being as prominent as most pattern welded swords these days. If HanBon uses anything to bring out the pattern, it's a very light touch, because you can only really see it when looking close. All in all, I like the visual depth it provides to the sword. The hamon is vibrant, with some extra layers of detail thanks to the folded steel, but it is reverse polished. Traditionally, the hamon would be polished to a milky white, with the brighter polish going to the shinogi and shinogi-ji. At least I think that's accurate. I'm certainly welcome to being corrected if I'm mistaken. In any case, the hamon is quite attractive. Looking at the kazaki, the yokote is straight and decently crisp, and while the line is not in exactly the same place on both sides of the blade, it's very, very close. The yokote is not geometric. There's no actual change to the geometry of the blade here, and the polish of the kazaki is no different to the rest of the blade. These are pretty minor nitpicks on a $300 sword, however, and I wouldn't really expect them to put in the amount of work it requires to properly shape and polish this area of the blade at this price point. The bohi starts somewhere before the habaki, as is traditional. On one side of the blade, it ends right at the yokote, and on the other, just past it. The lines of the bohi are nicely straight and crisp, and I don't see any rippling in it, or on any surface of the blade for that matter. One thing I've noticed with custom Japanese blades from China, the sharpening has always been excellent, and this Wakizashi from HanBon Forge is no different. The geometry is very well formed, with no secondary or micro bevel, and the edge is very sharp. Let's take a look at handling and how this Wakizashi compares to my wife's Swords of Northshire custom Wakizashi. So here we have the HanBon Forge Wakizashi. First thing I was going to show is how the saya doesn't fit all the way in. Pretty sure I just need a little bit of filing on either the top or bottom here to get that to fit better. This is it's a pretty nice little Wakizashi. I always find Wakizashis to be very nimble, very easy to move around. My wife likes them because she's got small hands. She can fit two hands on here and still cut pretty well. I suppose actually I could too. Feels kind of like overkill to me though, because it's such a small sword. It's not that heavy. Good control of it. I don't know how well this works with a curved Wakizashi, but feels good to move around. I've got here the Swords of Northshire one, Wakizashi we have, and I can immediately tell you this is much lighter. It's not sure if it's thinner on the spine. It does look like it's a little thinner on the spine. I think it's also just overall designed to be a lighter sword. Let's see. Yeah, the HanBon Forge Wakizashi has definitely got a thicker spine. Look like they have about the same amount of distal taper. I haven't done any measurements yet, which is not that much distal taper to be on either of these, to be honest. If you can see, the Tsuka on the HanBon Forge is definitely larger than the Swords of Northshire. I think this one's actually designed as a katana Tsuka, and this one's designed as a Wakizashi Tsuka. So I think that actually works out well with this, the HanBon Forge one, though, since it's a bigger, heavier Wakizashi. A bigger Tsuka helps bring the point of balance back a little bit. It's a fun little sword to swing around. It cuts very well. You'll see that shortly. My wife likes cutting with it as well. Biggest problem, there's a little bit of looseness here in the koshirae. A little bit of looseness here in the fuchi. You're probably not seeing that. Hopefully I got some better shots earlier in the review. And now on to some cutting. With the excellent sharpness on offer here, it's no surprise that the Wakizashi cuts very well. During the cutting tests, I definitely felt the difference in weight between the HanBon and Swords of Northshire Wakizashis. The HanBon has a bit more authority in the cut, but I had to concentrate on controlling it a bit more. And while both the fuchi and koshirae are slightly loose, I didn't notice them when swinging. So now it's time to talk bottom line. This HanBon Forge Wakizashi costs a total of $302, including shipping. Is it worth that price? Let's recap the good and bad of the sword. The good. It's a beautiful blade with nice koshirae, comes very sharp, isn't too expensive, and cuts very well. The bad. Both the koshirae and fuchi are slightly loose, and the saya fit is just terrible. Much like the Jaku Sinusword katana I reviewed, which also developed a loose fuchi, I think the looseness of the fittings is a real problem. Without fixing, I think it's likely they'll continue to loosen, eventually harming the ability of the sword to be used. While this is a relatively inexpensive sword, I don't think I should need to make adjustments to the fit of the koshirae so quickly. This means that for me, it's not worth the price. That being said, I think the issues here are probably not particularly difficult to fix. Looking at the different custom Japanese swords I've reviewed, I still consider Ryujin to be the best deal. They have just about the lowest prices, and in my experience, they don't seem to have the koshirae looseness problem of the other brands. But honestly, at this point, I'm starting to think that these custom Japanese swords are just not for me. And with that, let's draw this review to a close. Thank you for watching, and until next time, Alien 2'd out.